Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the Patio Gardening webinar, part of Broomfield's Green Calendar series. I'm Sharon Javelis, a new Master Gardener with the CSU Extension in Broomfield. I'll go ahead and turn off my camera now for the presentation so that you're better able to see the slides. In this webinar, I'll talk about what patio gardening is, container selection, preparation and maintenance, ornamentals, herbs and vegetables, and then close with ideas and examples. If you have questions, please add them to the chat box at any time, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. What is a patio garden? For the purpose of this webinar, we'll define it as gardening in self-contained units, pots or containers, on a solid or nearly solid surface that's typically close to the house and often used as a living space. This area can be covered, partially covered, or uncovered, and the surface may be concrete pavers, deck, gravel, or mulch. I'm not including raised beds in this definition, but that's not to say that they can't be a part of a patio garden. It's just that there are different requirements and plenty of other resources for raised bed gardening. There are many benefits of a patio garden. They are more accessible and allow for those with physical limitations to better be able to care for and enjoy the plants. Patio gardens are highly adaptable, great for gardening in small or awkward spaces. Growing in containers means that you can also move plants around to highlight flowers in season. Or if you live in a rental, you can take your garden with you when you move out. There's more control with a patio garden in that you can move containers to the ideal site or to protect them from hail. Improved soil conditions and protection from wildlife are also benefits. One of the very best benefits is fewer weeds. There's less investment of both time and money compared to traditional gardens, perfect for new gardeners or those who want to experiment with new plants. Vertical patio gardening can also provide privacy or block an unwanted view. It may also reduce neighborhood noise. Patio gardening is great for decorating that outdoor living space. Container plants help to soften the edges of the hardscape, provide color, movement, and visual interest. Here are some things to consider when choosing containers for your patio garden. Drainage is essential. If there are no drainage holes in your container, then create some using a drill. Clay and wood containers are very porous, dry out faster, and require more frequent watering. At the same time, they also provide beneficial air to the roots. Metal, plastic, and glazed pots are less porous, so they hold moisture longer, but may become waterlogged if not allowed to drain. Lower cost container options include plastic, resin, hanging baskets, or grow bags. Clay, wood, ceramic, metal, and composite containers generally cost a little more. Balance container costs with durability. Metal rusts, wood degrades over time, and clay and ceramic are prone to breakage. These are all things to keep in mind as you make your choices. The size and shape of your containers are important as well. If the container is too small for the plant, the soil will dry out between waterings and can lead to wilting, flower drop, and reduced production. Remember, it's not just the above ground plant to consider, but also the root system. Consider the weight and stability of your containers to avoid blowing over in the Colorado wind and causing damage to the plant or pot. It's best to opt for a larger pot rather than one that's too small. Will your plants be moved during the growing season? As adding water makes heavy pots even heavier, so plan ahead and use a container dolly for ease. Will the full-grown plant and its container give a balanced visual appearance? Incorporate the texture, color, and shape of the pot to enhance the overall design. Always be creative. Reuse and recycle non-garden containers in fun ways. For example, the vine growing around the bike in this left photo. But never use a container that previously held toxic material. You can DIY containers with materials like hypertufa or pallets. Hypertufa containers, the photo in the center, are created using cement and other ingredients and are molded into a container shape. You can find hypertufa recipes online. There are an infinite number of ways to use pallets to create containers or otherwise use in your patio garden. If you use pallets for edible plants, be sure they are kiln dried or heat treated with the letters HT for heat treated on the IPPC logo. Now that your containers are chosen, it's time to think about planting media. Most planting media will be labeled as potting soil, potting mix, or container mix in the stores. Planting media should allow for adequate drainage, but still have the ability to hold some moisture. It should be free of pests, diseases, and weed seeds, and have a slightly acidic pH. However, allow for differences in plant needs. For example, succulents prefer a more well-draining soil, while tropicals prefer soil that holds more moisture. Do not use native soils because container-grown plants need soil that doesn't easily compact like clay so that the roots can breathe. Common components of planting media include sphagnum peat moss, which holds moisture and provides airspace. Bark products are ground and are partially composted byproducts of the timber industry. Bark is a less expensive alternative to peat moss that provides good aeration, but it dries out quicker. Perlite is a volcanic glass that is crushed and heated so that it expands. It's non-toxic and sterile and promotes drainage and aeration in the soil. Vermiculite is mica that's been heated for expansion. It increases moisture and nutrient retention in the soil. Coir is a byproduct of the coconut fiber industry and can be substituted for peat moss in the soil. Coir may have high salt content, but you can look for some that's been processed to remove those. Let's discuss the differences of potting soil and potting mix. Potting mix typically contains sphagnum peat moss or coir, bark, vermiculite, and perlite. It's lightweight and soilless. Potting soil, on the other hand, contains pasteurized soil in addition to the other ingredients. Therefore, it has a heavier texture and often has higher nutrient levels. Both may also contain a fertilizer additive as well. Garden soil is a mix of soil and organics like wood chips, compost, and manure. Since it is not pasteurized, there's a potential for diseases, weeds, and/or pests. It's heavy and could have poor drainage and a higher salt content. Composts are typically sold for in-ground gardens, but there are some potting mixes. They are inconsistent in their properties, Some may have high levels of nutrients, which can burn plant roots. Compost is best mixed with soils in gardens rather than containers. Water. Your containers will need more frequent watering than in-ground plantings. Many things can affect watering frequency, including plant type, the number of plants in a container, and the size of the plant. We talked a bit about how container materials can affect soil desiccation. We also discussed how larger container sizes with respect to plant size can help offset some moisture loss. If you have a planting media with peat moss or cord, that will help with water retention. There are water holding polymers and gels that can be added to the planting media, but research shows that they don't have much of an effect on watering schedules here in Colorado. Having said all of that, what are your watering options? Having a set schedule is not realistic because there are too many variables, especially with our weather patterns here. It's best to check soil daily or more often for watering needs, depending on plants and weather. Just stick your finger into the top inch of soil. If it's dry, then water until it drains out of the bottom of the container. You can also set up an automated drip irrigation system. But continue to check the soil regularly. There may be times when you can skip a watering, or you may even need to add one due to variances in the weather. Mulching the containers will help retain moisture, as well as better control soil temperatures. Mulch also helps to prevent dirt splashing up while watering, so it keeps things cleaner. Mulch using wood chips, straw, bark, pine needles, gravel, or rocks. There are many types of self-watering containers on the market. Most of these have a reservoir at the bottom to hold water that will wick up the soil as needed. If using these types of containers, read instructions carefully and continue to do water checks on the soil just to be sure. Fertilizer. Check your soil mix for fertilizer before adding any additional. Some soil mixes already have a slow release fertilizer in it. Always follow product application directions for fertilizers. Fertilizer needs will depend on the specific plants and the planting media. Fertilizers available in slow release and water-soluble forms. It's best to water deeply to avoid salt buildup in the soil, which can be harmful to the plant. Salts can accumulate in the soil as water evaporates, leaving the salts behind. To prevent the salt buildup in your containers, allow some water to drain through while watering, and then empty the saucer if you have one. Don't leave the pot to sit in the water. If the drained water is absorbed by the soil, the salts that were washed out are reabsorbed through the drainage hole or directly through a clay pot. Slow release, granular, or timed release fertilizers need to be mixed in with the soil, so do that before planting. Some of the smaller granular fertilizer types, such as fish emulsion or bone meal, are mixed into the top layer of soil only, so they may be added at some point after planting. Water-soluble fertilizers are quick release and immediately available for the plant's use. It's best to apply less nutrients more frequently to prevent damaging the plant with excessive fertilization. Again, always follow product directions when fertilizing. Consider your objectives when choosing the right site for your patio garden. Would you like to create privacy, like this balcony in the top photo? Would you like to either block or enhance a view from a certain location? Is there something missing from your landscape that you'd like to add? Will you be entertaining in your patio garden, or will it be a spot for quiet morning coffee? Be sure to consider the plant's needs when choosing a site. In Colorado, with the intense high elevation sunlight, full sun is a spot that receives at least 6 hours of sun per day. Part sun or part shade is 6 hours of dappled shade, or about 4 hours of direct sun with shade the other hours. Shade can vary from bright, indirect light to very dense shade. A patio with a south-facing exposure will have different characteristics throughout the year than a north or west or east-facing one. Think about the mature size of the plants so that they aren't growing out into walkways, etc. Are there other uses of space? Do you need space for kids or pets to play? If so, choose appropriate container materials and placement to prevent damage to your garden. A microclimate is the climate of a small area of your yard. Several factors can cause variations in microclimate. Not accounting for trees or other variables, the south and west facing exposures will generally be warmer throughout the year than east and north facing exposures. Hardscape, such as concrete or brick, will store and radiate heat. Exterior walls can do the same, as well as block the wind or create shade. Trees could serve as windbreaks, preventing plant desiccation or provide cooling shade. Having a good understanding of the microclimate and matching that to the plant needs is essential for success. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat box at any time, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. Now that we've talked about generalities, it's time to move on to ornamentals. Ornamentals are plants that are grown for decorative purposes. As you can imagine, this covers a wide variety of plants. We'll start with color. If you feel comfortable combining colors and experimenting within a design, then go for it. For those who would like a bit more direction, here's a very short basic lesson on color theory. Colors can be either warm or cool. Yellow, orange, and red are warm colors, while green, blue, and violet are cool colors. Colors can be paired or grouped into types such as complementary, analogous, and monochromatic. Complementary colors are opposite on the color wheel. For example, orange and blue or red and green. Using complementary colors adds visual drama to the design. Think pop of color in a pleasing way. Our first example has the flowers of the blue lobelia with the complementary orange in the coleus foliage. The image in the center shows the complementary purple and yellow flowers of the calabrauchia or trailing petunia. In this last image, the green of the creeping jenny and the sweet potato vine contrast nicely with the red in the coleus and the begonias. Analogous colors are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. This creates more of a subtle look while still having color variation. In this arrangement, the purple scabiosa flowers flow well with the bluish sea holly and these other reddish violet flowers. Monochromatic colors are the hue or pure color plus white and or black. In this color wheel figure, the outer ring here is the pure color or hue. A tint, the next ring in, is the hue plus white. Think of the pastel version. Think of the pastel version of the pure color. The tone, the third ring in, is hue plus black and white. Think of toning down the hue. In the shade, the center ring is hue plus black. So the shade is a darker version of the hue. When designing with a monochromatic palette, plant form and texture are more apparent. Here are some examples of monochromatic container plantings. As you can see, monochromatic does not mean boring. The large leaves and structure of the Canna australis and the interesting foliage of the sweet potato vine here really stand out in this first arrangement. In the top right image, we have the spikes of the Phormium tenax up here, and the trailing silver falls. The fleece flower included here with these other two all provide visual interest. In the bottom right image, the flower carpet roses echo the yellow variegation of the cascading Japanese forest grass. When designing your patio garden, consider balance and structure. The desirable shape and size is relative to the pot and space. 3 overall shapes make for a pleasing arrangement: a statement piece or thriller, fullness or filler, and softness or spiller. Hence the familiar thriller, filler, and spiller we've come to know. So you can see in this top photo, we have this is a very dramatic thriller piece here. We have some fillers, and then spillers are coming down over the edge. Up on the wall, we have more spillers. This already has drama being up higher, so they've added spillers to enhance that. This bottom photo, you can see the thrillers here. This looks like a good one. And there's one way back here. The fillers, again, the coleus, then spillers coming down, trailing all the way down. Thriller plants add height and drama to the container. You can have a single stem thriller plant like this canna in the first image, or a multi-stemmed one like the Swiss chard in this middle one. This third image has 2 plants that are about the same height, but the purple flowered salvia has more dramatic impact than the golden hue. Golden hue. Fillers are plants that make the container look full. You can use 1, 2, or 3 different types of fillers depending on the size of the pot. Plants with interesting foliage or flowers and a mounding habit make good filler choices. In this first image, there's the Rex begonia, caladium, and purple shamrock as fillers. The second, we have the petunias and the marigolds. And this last image over here, we have the Dusty Miller around here and the chrysanthemums in the center. Fillers grow over the edge or spill out of the container. Sweet potato vines and ivies are great spillers. You can also achieve balance by working with the existing architecture, such as this bench here, or by adding structures like this one, or an arch or a trellis. Also consider grouping containers and displays to create overall balance. Here are a couple more examples of grouping containers to achieve balance and create visual effects. The fountain grass in the first photo serves as the thriller piece of this entire grouping. In the second photo, the outdoor room here has strategically placed containers and hanging baskets to help define this room. There's pots along here. So there's little windows here and here. This path leads you in and around here to go into the room. Plant selection can be overwhelming. Annuals are considered one season only plants, while perennials will grow back year after year. However, perennials are generally treated as annuals in containers rather than overwintered, because the roots are not protected in pots like they are in the ground. In order for a perennial to be considered winter hardy in a container, it should be hardy to 2 zones away. For example, our plant hardiness zone in Broomfield is 6A. If you want to overwinter plants in a container, look for perennials hardy to at least zone 4A. Other possibilities include bulbs, ornamental grasses, small woody plants, and vegetables. In addition to design, make sure to group plants according to similar light and moisture needs, as well as their mature size. A word on houseplants. They are perennial in their native habitat, but not here. You can still plant them out in containers with annuals, but be sure to bring them indoors in the fall before temperatures get too low. Here are a couple of resources for choosing your plants. Plant Select plants have been bred to use less water and be tough in our challenging climate. Many are one-of-a-kind plants. You can visit the website plantselect.org for options, and then head to your favorite nursery to purchase. Another resource for plant selection is the CSU Annual Trial Garden. Visit their website at flowertrials.colostate.edu to see their best of annuals and top performer perennials. These plants have been trialed on their hardiness, overall appearance, maintenance, lack of problems, and flower color, abundance, and vigor. Again, you should be able to find these at your local nursery. Succulents are plants that store water in the stem or leaves. This group includes the cactus family. You may have heard about hardy succulents and would like to incorporate them into your patio garden. However, always check the plant tag for cold hardiness and remember the 2-zone rule for containers. With this definition, Most winter-hardy container-grown succulents should be brought inside during the winter or treated as an annual. For succulents, use a very well-drained soil or buy a cactus and succulent medium at the garden center. The freeze-thaw cycles, not to mention the desiccating winds of Colorado winters, can wreak havoc on your patio garden. A bit of preparation for the winter can be a lifesaver for your plants. We've discussed the 2-zone rule for perennials, but even so, there may be risks to leaving container plants outdoors without protection for the winter. If you don't want to chance possible plant loss, here are some options for you. You could bring them indoors. Be sure to slowly acclimate plants to the indoor environment. Storing the plants in an unheated garage or shed is another option. You can bury the entire pot, plant and all, in the ground and cover with mulch. Clustering containers together in a protected location, like this center image here, and then mulching the right image, or wrapping is another strategy. Whatever you do, don't forget to periodically check the soil moisture and water as needed, at least once a month. Keep in mind that plants don't need as much water during the dormant winter season. Store porous containers like terracotta pots indoors to prevent cracking and breakage. If you must leave them outdoors, try wrapping in a couple layers of bubble wrap to insulate against the cold, like is shown here. To wrap up the ornamental section, here are some additional tips and tricks. For a balanced look, mature plant height should be 1.5 to 2 times the height of the container. In other words, 1/3 container, 2/3 plants. However, also account for the visual weight of both the container and the plants. In this photo, the bright blue color and shape of this container adds visual weight to the overall design. It looks a bit out of proportion now, but as these plants grow in height, fill out, and spill down the sides, it will look much more balanced. When planting, think about how the container will be viewed and arrange the plants accordingly. Don't be afraid to mix textures, height, and color to create a look that's uniquely yours. It's your garden. Have fun. As a reminder, if you have questions, please add them to the chat box and at any time, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. Now we'll move on to vegetables and herbs. While you can grow almost anything in containers, there are unique challenges, space being the main one. Look for varieties with dwarf, bush, patio, pocket, mini, anything cutesy in the name. Also check your labels, seed packets, whatever the case may be. Notice the asterisks on tomatoes and beans. We'll touch on that later. What can't you grow in a container? Corn. Corn is something that should be planted out in a regular garden. When it comes to vegetable containers, bigger is definitely better. Ornamentals can recover from neglect much better than vegetables. If a vegetable plant gets too dried out or doesn't have the proper nutrients, the produce can taste bitter or the yield can be reduced. Both container volume and depth are important for healthy root growth when growing container vegetables. The diameter will determine how many plants you can have in one pot. Always follow instructions on the seed packet or plant tag for proper spacing. We won't consider container diameter or width because that'll depend on your planting scheme. Here are some examples to illustrate container depths and volumes for various common vegetables. We have 4 entries for an 8-inch deep container, each with different volumes for different types of vegetable plants. Most salad greens, beets, and radishes will need about 1 to 1.5 gallons of space in an 8-inch container, in an 8-inch deep container. For healthy root growth. Peppers, bush beans, and bush cucumbers will need 3 or more gallons for the same depth. Eggplant needs even more at 4 to 5 gallons. And zucchini will need a 5-gallon container as well as a 3-foot by 3-foot diameter. Something like a whiskey barrel sized container will work for zucchini. Tomatoes need even more space at 12 inches deep and 2 to 5 gallons of volume. This number is for dwarf, bush, or patio type tomatoes, and the specific volume will depend on the variety. If you'd like to plant beans, it's important to know the difference between the types. Bush beans grow to about 1 to 2 feet and produce their beans all at once. Runner beans, or half-pole beans, are a vining type, but the vines only grow to about 3 feet. Pole beans grow to 5 to 6 feet, take longer to mature, and produce steadily throughout the summer to the first harvest. You can harvest more beans in less space with pole beans, but you'll need a good-sized trellis with stability. There are 2 types of tomatoes, indeterminate and determinate. Indeterminate tomatoes, shown on the left, continue growing throughout the season and can easily overwhelm a container. It's best to plant those in the ground with a tall, strong support system. Determinate tomatoes, shown on the right, reach a certain height, then stop growing and are the best option for patio gardening. Determinate tomatoes will have the words bush, dwarf, container, or patio in the name. They can be supported with a typical tomato cage or something similar. Super compact or hanging basket varieties do not need support, but all others do. Fertilizing your container vegetables. Vegetables need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Your potting media may contain fertilizer, but it won't be enough to last all season. Fertility needs are dependent on the crop and the growth stage of the plant. More fertilizer is not always better. Too much nitrogen for a tomato plant means lots of green growth and no fruits. Too much phosphorus can harm mycorrhizal fungi, leading to less nutrient uptake by the roots. Fertilizing lightly and frequently is the way to go. Most herbs do well in containers, especially the following: parsley, sage, basil, thyme, rosemary, mint, chives, and dill. Here's a chart with general growing requirements of some herbs, but really it's best to read the seed packet or plant label for that information. This concludes the section on vegetables and herbs. If you have questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll answer them in just a bit. Here are just a few of the many, many ideas and examples you can find elsewhere. There's no rule that says you have to have ornamentals in one container and herbs or vegetables in a different container. Salad greens with their varied leaf shapes and colors make an excellent filler for ornamental containers. The kale stands out in a good way in this container arrangement on the left. On the right, the yellow in the Swiss chard harmonizes with the snapdragons and pansies. Mixing herbs with flowers is fun. The left-hand container uses basil as a filler, while the right one is using thyme. We have the basil here, and the thyme here. The ornamental peppers on the left, shown here, make a colorful statement and are also edible. On the right, a tumbling Tom tomato grows in a hanging basket, looking more ornamental than edible. Here we have some painted 5-gallon buckets. So 5-gallon buckets and some spray paint you can have a beautiful, appropriate container for your tomatoes, tomato plant, and cage. These are just a few ideas to get you started, but the combinations and possibilities are endless. Thank you. And now we can take time for questions. While we're answering questions, I'll go to the next slide of resources so that you have those.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I see we have one question currently. Do you see that?
Yes. Is it necessary to replace all the container soil every growing season for both ornamental plants and edible vegetables, herbs? So I think the short answer is yes. Growing plants in containers, the roots, since the roots are contained, they're not able to grow further in search of nutrients and the things that they need. And so they really use pretty much everything that's in that soil. What I like to do is kind of rotate. I'll take that container soil that's been used and maybe throw it into my raised bed garden or, out in the yard somewhere. So hopefully that answers a question. Will the program be recorded so I can watch it again? Yes, I believe so. Could you speak into that, Sarah, please?
Yep, it is being recorded. You can watch it a couple different places, the Broomfield Library Facebook and the City County of Broomfield YouTube. It's live on both those places right now, and the recordings will be available in both those places as well.
Good.
And Sharon, I have a question from Facebook, if you'd like to answer that.
Sure.
Rachel says, I just purchased 2 tall containers to flank my front door. I haven't planted anything because I'm afraid that the morning sun against the brink will cook the plants. what types of plants would you suggest?
That is a good one. So I think your first stop should be checking options at plantselect.org. Try to find plants that can handle that extra heat. I can't think of any, off the top of my head. Again, it depends on the specific container, but that should give you some good options, as well as the CSU Trial Gardens website that I mentioned earlier. You can see which ones were trialed for their tolerance to heat and sun. Those are probably your best resources for looking for those. Hopefully that answers your question. Any others?
Got some thank yous coming from Facebook and Zoom. I've got no other questions on my end. Great job.
Well, thank you, and thanks for joining me. Container gardening is something that I've not personally tried a whole lot since way back when I lived in a tiny little condo in Florida, which was a different environment. But after researching everything for this webinar, I'm very excited to give it a go this year and get started. So hopefully you all will join me in that.